Good evening, Americans. This is your favorite alien here on the evening of Monday, July 26th, 2021. Sitting in for Paul Harvey this evening. Stand by for the rest of the story. Well, today's story is Jack the Ripper. Who was the Ripper? And most of you have grown up with the story of Jack the Ripper. And he killed 5 women in the section of London called Whitechapel. There. And why was he called Jack the Ripper? Well, he is credited with 5 murders between August and November of 1888. And the news media papers at London at the time had a field day with that between the months of August and November. Ripper came to the scene and left just the same. Whoosh, I'm here, and whoosh, I'm gone. And 5 ladies lay dead and mutilated. But they were of the lower class, the prostitutes, as you call them today, ladies of the night, and in the bad area of London called Whitechapel District. So they weren't exactly considered outstanding community citizens. And, there was letters that were sent to the police in Scotland Yard and the newspapers. And one of them, he wrote Jack the Ripper. And there was a lot of things that came out that he must have had medical training, and he must have been this guy, he must have been this guy, he must have been members of the royal family, and all sorts of things. And there was a lot of suspects that they came with in 1888, and subsequently the late 20th century, early 21st century, they were, saying they could be Jack the Ripper. And in a lot of cases, most of the so-called experts dismiss them because they say that Jack the Ripper had this thing that he did, and he operated, and he only killed 5 people that you know of. That's all the credit that Jack the Ripper gets is 5. The canon murders, as they call them, because it's like a Bible, a canon book. Well, this, and there's other guys that were there, and they can't nail them for sure. But as a favorite alien from another planet, I got a hunch on one guy. And I would say that Jack the Ripper was actually the first transcontinental serial killer. Because wherever this guy went, deaths followed. He never got associated with them. But you can't be that. Wherever you go, you get dead people all the way around you. You leave, the dead people stop. Yeah. Go to another place, dead people start. Yeah. And remember, this is the late 1880s. You had a heavy amount of drugs was prevalent in the society, no matter if you were on this side of the pond or the other side of the pond. And, but to me, and a lot of experts would say that the guy that I picked disqualifies because he didn't have anything in common with Jack the Ripper. And I would answer them with, well, you can't book a person in one thing, and you're trying to paint them in this color here. A human being has different colors, shades of gray. All of us have shades of gray, and we're different. Sometimes we're this color gray, other times we're the other color gray. We're never the same 100% of the time. And Jack the Ripper was probably never the same. He just decided to experiment, and I believe that's what he was doing, experimenting with these 5 women. And he probably killed people almost the same way, but sometimes he was inside and sometimes he was outside. And that's why they would disqualify my suspect, because he was an inside killer and Jack the Ripper was an outside killer, as they call him. But he was there at the time Jack the Ripper was having fun. And he also left, because there's evidence that a certain guy left London just at the same time that Jack the Ripper disappeared. So the rest of the story, Americans, is my suspect for Jack the Ripper is a guy from Chicago whose name is H.H. Holmes. He was the most prolific serial killer the U.S. had ever known up to that time, and probably even today. He probably would outdo Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, the BK, and the Green River Killer. He'd probably outdo them all. Because he only got accused of 1 murder. He got executed for 1 murder. He did admit to 27. He never admitted he was Jack the Ripper, although he was always talking about Jack the Ripper. H.H. Holmes is an interesting guy. Wherever he went, death followed. And he in Chicago, in 1889, he was back in Chicago and started building a hotel, which became known as Murder Castle. A lot of people disappeared in Chicago between 1889 and 1896. There, especially during the 1893 World's Fair. Remember, that was a battle between Edison and Tesla won, and he got to light up the fair. Well, a lot of people came into that. I mean, Chicago, that's what they wanted. They wanted to be the biggest city in the Midwest and the second city behind New York. And that cemented their position to a second city until Los Angeles took over well into the 20th century. But with all those people that come in, a lot of people weren't missed. And by calculations of today's experts, he probably killed hundreds. Because when they finally went into his murder castle, he had everything in there, including crematoriums. So he could have disposed of the bodies easy. Whew. Oh yeah, and he liked to get body parts to sell. So that was H.H. Holmes. And they would say, oh, but he was an inside killer because he killed inside. He would always snatch you. He had different things on his hotel, different passages where he would come out and you had a room, you were gone. And these different secret passages led down to the crematorium and all the torture chambers he had downstairs of his murder castle there. So like I said, for the rest of the story, I would say that H.H. Holmes is my only candidate for Jack the Ripper, because he was out there. Everybody mentioned him. He wasn't exactly a good guy. He wasn't liked very much. And he was more of a loner. And there is evidence that he left London about the same time that Jack the Ripper disappeared. And also his great-great-great-grandson, last name of Mudgett, came out in the late 20th century and said that he thought his great 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 grandfather was a murderer, and probably Jack the Ripper. And there was a guy from the CIA that helped him, and they came close, but like I said, because Jack the Ripper was considered an outside killer and H.H. Holmes was an inside killer, they discounted that. But the other similarities are so there that I would say, somebody has to have, we can't stay inside all the time. They got to go outside, and probably this was an experiment for Mr. H.H. Holmes. And of course, London, like Chicago, got cold and drifty during the winter time. And he probably didn't like that. Sitting in for Paul Harvey, this is your favorite alien. And now, a potential rest of the story. Good day.